and welcome back to Book and Page. So we are actually on to our very final video about Oedipus Rex, or at least Sophocles' version of Oedipus Rex. So, as always, we are going to do a quick summary of what happened in this section of the play, and then talk a little bit about how all of this went so horribly wrong. Well, we know how it went so horribly wrong. Really, with this one, we're dealing with the consequences. So, the final section of the play begins with a second messenger coming onto the stage, and this person is not to be confused with the first messenger, who was from Corinth. This guy is one of the Theban people from inside Oedipus's palace, and he's about to tell us exactly what he just watched go down. So, turns out Jocasta has re-entered the house. We saw her leave the last section, and she's freaking out. She's absolutely upset because she's figured out that she's been sleeping with her own son. So she laments a while after over their marriage bed, and after Oedipus comes in and distracts the servants, she hangs herself by Jocasta. May you rest in peace. So, then we turn to Oedipus, who comes in to find Jocasta, his mother-wife, dead, cuts her down, then takes the brooches from her dress and stabs his own eyes out. So, Oedipus has decided he wants Thebes to see the blind father-killer incest person, and is begged to be let out of the castle. So the messenger's like, well, he's coming now, yay! And Oedipus enters onto the stage, continuing to lament the terrible mistakes he has made. So we have a bit of an interesting exchange between the chorus and Oedipus, with Oedipus singing and the chorus asking what he's planning on doing, why he reacted the way he did, and similar questions, with Oedipus singing the answers. Eventually, too, we have Creon re-enter the scene, and the chorus sort of steps back here in order to let Creon handle Oedipus. Originally, Creon's trying to convince Oedipus to enter back into his palace, but eventually they come to the understanding that Creon will take control of the kingdom, but not Oedipus's sons, who are grown men, but he will take control of his nieces, who he then brings in so they can say goodbye to their father and weep, and finally sends them away, and Oedipus convinces Creon to let him leave the city, the poor, pitiful, blind man that he now is. The end. Yep, I mean, it's a tragedy, so were we expecting a happy ending? No. Were we quite expecting a blind man on the stage singing? No. But that has been what happened, so let's go ahead and talk about a few things. The first big one I think we have to talk about is in fact the punishment that we see both Jocasta and Oedipus go through. Jocasta, of course, is punished with death, while Oedipus is punished with blindness. And it can seem uneven, truth be told, because Jocasta just slept with her son, unknowingly, and Oedipus, again, unknowingly, slept both with his mother, but also killed his father. So he's got a little more that he has to pay for than Jocasta necessarily does. Now, when you look at their punishments, they are both self-inflicted. It hasn't been directly inflicted by anybody else. Apollo has certainly prompted them towards this outcome by reminding them that they need to find the person who killed the previous king. But it has actively been Jocasta who hangs herself, and Oedipus who takes his own eyes out. But, again, you look at it and you say, but why these particular punishments? And in fact, even the chorus sort of calls Oedipus out on this, when the chorus says that he would be better off dead than living and blind. And Oedipus then sort of has to explain why he has chosen this punishment for himself, why he didn't kill himself as punishment for his actions. And it's sort of a really interesting response to try and unpack, because what he says is this was the more appropriate punishment because his eyes are often to blame for the mistakes that he made. With the idea that he saw what happened without really seeing what's happening. He saw himself kill his father without recognizing he in fact had killed his father. He saw all the marital relations, sexual relations, loving relations he had with Jocasta without recognizing that Jocasta was in fact his mother. So this failure to see properly means that intentional blindness then actually becomes the more fitting punishment. If he could not see properly, then he does not deserve to see at all. And it's sort of an interesting way of considering it, right? Because when you look at him compared to someone like Tiresias, who sees better due to his blindness, what's being said here seems to be something along the lines of there's different levels of seeing, right? And there's the physical level of seeing, which is often more detrimental to you than a knowledgeable or spiritual level of seeing that tells you a better truth. So, in removing his physical way of seeing, Oedipus is actually directly confronting the truth of his own actions, and not attempting to escape them. For Oedipus, in a lot of ways, death would be too quick. It would be sort of that willing blindness to the truth, where you recognize it for a moment and then you peace out, and you don't have to really think about it and understand all the mistakes and your choices and how they've affected things. And Oedipus is directly confronting it. He's taking away his own physical sight, so he's punished with pain, but he has to live with that punishment. He has to live both with the knowledge of who and what he is, as well as then the response to that. He has to live with the response to him being a blinded cripple that a lot of people are just going to run away from in terror, but also he has to be fully recognized as Oedipus, the man who killed his father and slept with his mother and bore his own siblings. He has to let the world see him and see himself. So blindness both marks him as a noticeable person when it comes to this. People will recognize him because he does not have eyes. But it also allows him to, or forces him really, to stew in the darkness and recognize the darkness he has within himself. And he becomes much more understanding of the truth when physical sight is removed from him. So Jocasta is punished for her one sin by death. Oedipus is forced to be punished for his multiple sins through life that eventually will lead with death. He'll face that punishment as well. But he has to live with the recognition of what he actually has done. And the blindness then represents that in a lot of ways. It forces him into this reflective position because he can't see anything new. It forces him to be recognized by other people, and it forces him to rely on other people because he's now blind. He has to rely on other people helping him to pay penance, by helping him survive, by helping him leave Thebes. He's suddenly very drained of all the power that he had throughout life, and he's back to this disabled baby that he started life as. This time it's moved from his feet to his eyes. So it is sort of this interesting return to when all of this started. We end where we began. But when we recognize then that punishment being set out, it can make us feel very uncomfortable, because we have to ask ourselves, how at fault is Oedipus? This has always been a question that's been coming up, because if he did not know he was doing these things, then is the punishment really fitting? If he was not aware of these actions and had no way to avoid them, how do we respond to that? And in truth, the play does sort of give us both answers. But the actual outcome of the play, we are supposed to recognize that there are things in this world that we are supposed to avoid and deserve to be punished for doing. Killing our fathers, sleeping with our mothers, things like that. But it is a tragedy because we, as humans, err often. And we'll make mistakes even without knowing we will do that. But that doesn't prevent those things from still being off limits. The play itself is asking us to hold both of these ideas at once. That some things are unforgivable, but humans are flawed enough to still do them. And that's tragic. So we walk away as audience members feeling this uneasiness because we are being asked to hold these two thoughts together and accept them both, but they don't seem to meld well. We don't like the idea that we could be responsible for something we're not even aware we're doing. But it is something that we have to accept. And that's, again, what makes it tragic. We pity and fear what has happened to Oedipus because we see the possibility of it occurring in ourselves. Again, maybe not to the extreme. Literature often goes for the extreme because they really want to lay the complexities out for you. So maybe we're not going around accidentally killing our own fathers or sleeping with our own parents, but we can unknowingly make choices that will affect us greatly, and we have to accept those consequences, even if they're not good. So we have this uncomfortable feeling, but I also believe the play does offer us some ways of trying to avoid this thing. And it's really this idea that you need to start trying to be more aware of yourself, your actions, and your surroundings. Know your family, know your friends, probably know your enemies as well, and recognize them for what they are, right? That's the big error that Oedipus had, where he mistook his adopted parents for his real parents, and mistook his real parents for absolute strangers. We also then need to listen closely to what the gods tell us. And maybe this isn't as applicable to today. A lot of audience members might not believe in gods or a god, and that's okay. But certainly to a Greek audience, listen to what the gods tell you is a pretty big lesson. Like, when the oracle tells you, this is a really stupid day to do this thing, don't do this thing. It's a pretty big one for the Greek, at least. And then understand both the laws of nature and the laws of your city and abide by them. Know the limits of all aspects of your life and live within them to prevent these tragic outcomes from occurring. Without that knowledge, you could do a lot of things that will have consequences and will eventually punish you. But if you aim towards having this knowledge and abiding by it, then you can prevent what occurred to Oedipus from occurring to yourself. So in the end, we might be really uncomfortable with this idea, but we also have some ways of avoiding it. If we're more knowledgeable about ourselves and our actions, then we're less likely to act in an unknowledgeable way that will come back to bite us. But how knowledgeable can we be? And how often are we given those chances to be super knowledgeable? The other issue with this play is Oedipus is in a position that maybe he's being punished because he should have this knowledge because he's in a higher position in society. If Oedipus hadn't been a prince, would he necessarily have been in this position if he had just been a common person of Thebes? And the interesting thing is that as this section goes on, Oedipus and the chorus, who are the common people of Thebes, switch positions of power as sort of a really positive way to highlight that Oedipus has fallen that far, because he's the one who sings while the chorus asks him questions. And usually in this play it's been the opposite. The chorus has sung quite a bit, and Oedipus speaks. So Oedipus has come down within this last section of the play, and he's answerable then to the people of Thebes, who have been suffering on his behalf. The plague has affected the common people of Thebes, not the royal family. So Oedipus, in fact, has to reveal himself fully to those common people and say, these are the mistakes I've made, and this is my punishment for them. But towards the end of the scene, Thebes even loses that power, because when it comes to his explaining of the punishment, Oedipus begins to speak again. He does not sing about his reasons for blindness. And shortly after that point, Creon enters the scene, and the normal power balance is restored, and suddenly Thebes is no longer the focus of receiving this knowledge, so they themselves will no longer suffer, because the royal family is back. Creon has returned, and again Oedipus gives him the power over Thebes. And suddenly he's not answerable to Thebes anymore, he's answerable to Creon. And this is highlighted with the fact that Oedipus's children survive. He mentions he has 2 sons, who aren't in Creon's power because they're grown men, but he also has 2 daughters. And he passes to Creon's power. And in fact, they actually enter. They don't speak, but we do visually see them on the stage. And Creon exerts his power over them by both bringing them on and saying this is a gift he's given to Oedipus, but also sending them off, even when Oedipus asks him not to let them leave. He makes that choice, and suddenly this power balance that has let the common people of Thebes understand what has occurred has been reset. And we've returned to the common people down here and the royal family up here. Which, again, is uncomfortable, because it was the Theban people who were suffering. So it was the Theban people to which Oedipus had to answer. And Sophocles allows this briefly, and then very quickly says, but we need to reset this power balance with the same family. And keep in mind again that he writes a trilogy, and Oedipus Rex chronologically is the first one in that trilogy. This family, as we've seen through the Bacchae into now, is not a good thing for Thebes, because they have continually made choices that has caused Thebes to suffer, because they are in the positions of power, but they're also in positions of blindness. So how fair is it then that the chorus gets pushed aside, and Creon returns, and he becomes the focus, he becomes the one to allow Oedipus to leave? That really should be the chorus's position. It's Thebes that needs to let this man walk away. But Creon comes back in and says, well, the family's still here, and the family's going to continue existing in Thebes. And if you know the rest of the trilogy, that means Thebes must continue to suffer. And the chorus can't really do anything about it. They do not have the power anymore. That's been stripped from them that they had with Oedipus. They need to focus on the fact that Oedipus will leave and the suffering they're currently going through will end. But they cannot acknowledge the fact that there seems to be something rotten within the royal family itself that they can't dislodge and they can't be freed of. They can send individual members out away from them, but it never has solved the problem of Thebes. It just continues to suffer. So we might walk away with this idea that if we're more knowledgeable, we can protect ourselves. But what happens if those in charge of us refuse to become knowledgeable, refuse to see how things are? How do we protect ourselves when others aren't willing to protect us? Oh, hard question to end on, huh? Because there's no easy answer to that question. Philosophy has attempted to ask that question for years. Marx and the socialist and communist revolutions, they make the argument of, well, we just kill all those people in charge. But a lot of other philosophers say that's not going to work. Hey, philosopher kings, we put the right person in charge, and we should be fine. Is any of that happening in Thebes? Not quite. And I thought, hey, yes, let's continue to talk about powerful positions and the people existing in them and their effects on other people by heading on to our Arthurian legend for our next book and page series. So, I picked up Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is technically an anonymous text. We're not quite sure who wrote it overall. I've picked this particular Arthurian legend to start on because it is physically one of the shorter ones, and it's focused around Gawain, who, oddly enough, is one of the Arthurian knights I think a lot more people can connect with than the pinnacle Lancelot, Gareth, Galahad, or on the other end, Mordred, right? So, before we get on to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight itself, I will do a video about Arthurian legend and Arthurian tales, with how much they've actually changed, and so how much can you say is real Arthurian canon. But yes, this will be our next book. Ain't it gonna be fun? So, I'm gonna start reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.